Welcome to our Earth Day webinar. I'm glad you're all well enough to join us for today's discussion. As the world struggles with COVID-19 pandemic, we'll explore how energy efficiency can help us fight climate change and at the same time put people back to work once the health threats subside. Before our speakers begin, I'd like to note a few logistics. All attendees are currently in listen-only mode. Following our speakers' remarks, we will open the webinar to questions. So during the presentations, please type your questions into the chat box. We're recording this webinar and we'll send you a link in a day or two. Today, we have 4 distinguished speakers who offer a variety of perspectives: utility, nonprofit, academia, and state government. Penny McLean-Connor, Chief Customer Officer at Eversource Energy and ACEEE's Board Chair. Steve Nadell, Executive Director at ACEEE, Diana Hernandez, Assistant Professor at Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health, and Janet Joseph, Senior Vice President for Strategy and Market Development at NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. We'll start with Penny McLean-Connor. Based in Boston, she is the Chief Customer Officer and Senior Vice President of Customer Group for Eversource Energy. She's responsible for providing electric and gas service to 3.5 million customers, keeping the lights on as we shelter in place, and for delivering energy efficiency programs. In addition, she chairs ACEEE's Board of Governors. She'll talk about our new call to action, part of our 40th anniversary this year. As Penny will explain, we have an invigorated focus on energy efficiency as an essential tool for fighting climate change. Penny?
Good morning, everyone, and I am so thrilled to be spending time with you today on this 50th anniversary of Earth Day, and so proud to be representing ACEEE, an organization that continues to lead the way by focus on energy efficiency as the first fuel. You know, ACEEE was founded back in 1979, and back then we had an oil crisis. There were long lines at the gas stations, and the solutions being put forth by DC and others were around simply drilling more. But there were a group of like-minded individuals, men and women from academia, from the Department of Energy, from public service commissions across this country who said there is a better way. And they recognized that the better way was to simply reduce the waste associated with the energy that we use today. So they created and wrote a manifesto. It was grounded in research and it identified a path forward that said we can use buildings more efficiently. We can be more efficient with transportation, have more efficient appliances and industrial processes. Today, we are 40 years later, and ACEEE's accomplishments have been significant. Slide 2, let's move forward, Maxine. We have identified an invigorated vision, as Wendy discussed, and it is to aggressively mobilize and scale up energy efficiency to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and combat climate change, and to do so at substantial economic savings. But here is my challenge to all of you. We must turn talk into action. It is not enough for us to be observers in the stands. Rather, we must get onto the playing field. We must do things individually, as communities, as states, as countries, to aggressively address the climate challenges that we face. At ACEEE, the work that has been accomplished over the past 40 years has had significant benefits. Not only does it employ a large number of individuals locally across this country installing energy efficiency measures, it has doubled energy productivity. Slide 2. Indeed, our energy use across this country has reduced by 50%. And per capita savings on energy bills is over $2,000. So we have done so in a way that saves dollars in energy for consumers all across this country. But we must do more. The pace of change threatens our world's well-being. It threatens our health and safety, and it is disproportionately impacting low-income communities, communities of color, and developing countries. Our founding manifesto got us to this point, but more needs to be done. Our board, about 18 months ago, had a strategic session where we went into depth, a discussion about the manifesto and was it enough? And we felt like the original manifesto did not address climate change and it did not combine with renewables. And we recognized that to achieve our goal of an 80% reduction by 2050, we had to tap into those other areas of addressing climate change and renewables. So we did develop a new vision. Next slide. Our vision, as I shared, is to aggressively mobilize and scale energy efficiency. But we have to do so while we combat climate change, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and achieve substantial economic savings. So we developed a new vision, and it sets goals for 2050. And as I reflect on that, and I have a teenage son in the next room that's studying from home, as we all are working and studying from home, I'll be shy of 50 by then. What can we do in the near term to demonstrate that we can aggressively scale these solutions? And because of that, we felt like that we needed to put in some midterm markers, some markers in 2030. So I want to talk about those. To achieve those markers, though, as I shared, it's going to take all of us to get onto the playing field. Individually, we need to be demonstrating and modeling renewable and energy efficient solutions. I am so proud to serve on the Medfield, my own town of Medfield's Energy Committee, and I know several of them are on the call today. They have been leading the charge for well over a decade on reducing the usage in our local town and applying renewables. We are leading by example at my own company, at Eversource. Not only are we the largest developer of offshore wind, which will be a key renewable that will play into the solutions of creating a grid that is all renewables, but importantly, we are leading by example. We are the first utility in the nation to declare that we will be carbon neutral by 2030, and we are actively working on plans to do that. As I said, we all have to get onto the field and we have to take action to achieve these goals. And let's explore a little bit about the goals around energy efficiency, which alone can take us halfway there to our climate goals. So next slide. We can reduce our emissions and industrial greenhouse gas emissions by 1/3. That is a marker that we're identifying in our new vision to reduce industrial greenhouse gas emissions by 1/3. And a key element to that is to have our industrial processes using energy management systems to ensure that they're using energy wisely. Fuel efficient vehicles, an increase by 50% by 2030, and that all new vehicles, 20% of new vehicles are all electric. It's important that as we are building new construction, that we are doing so with zero energy construction. Something that my local energy committee is very committed to as we look at new town buildings that are being put into place. Again, we all have to be on the playing field. In the power sector, using energy efficiency and demand response as a first resource, Massachusetts has demonstrated leadership in that for years. We are 9 years in a row being #1 on the ACEEE scorecard, and that is because we are looking to energy efficiency first. And in fact, our plans going forward tap into behind the meter demand assets. In fact, the plans just for Eversource tap into 100 megawatts of behind the meter demand assets to reduce peak usage. It's important that we reduce the burden on low-income households, where our marker is a 50% reduction by 2030. Research by ACEEE shows that 24% of low-income households spend greater than 6% of share of wallet on energy, and that represents a high burden. We have so much work to do in this space, and more so as we think about the economic times we're into now with COVID-19. finally, we know that with climate change, temperatures will increase. So we do need to transform our cooling solutions and technologies. Move forward as we think about our opportunities. Next slide. I just want to close by saying it is important that we all get onto the playing field and really embrace the opportunity for using energy efficiency wisely. It takes us 50% of our goal by 2050. Our vision at ACEEE is to aggressively mobilize and scale energy efficiency to reduce those greenhouse gas emissions and combat climate change, and to do so at substantial economic savings. I look forward to our panel continuing this discussion. Steve's going to dive into a little bit more on these solutions, and I thank you for the opportunity to spend a few minutes with you today.
Thank you, Penny. We now turn to Steve Nadell, who has led ACEEE as its executive director since 2001. He has worked in the energy efficiency field for more than 30 years and has authored more than 100 reports. Last year, he co-authored our Halfway There report with Lowell Unger. The report underpins the call to action that Penny described. It provides a roadmap for how energy efficiency can cut U.S. energy use and emissions 50% by 2050 and get us halfway to our climate goals. Steve?
Okay, thank you, Wendy, and I appreciate being here with all of you. As we are talking, I'm seeing the counter edging up to 700 of you. I very much appreciate you're all spending a little bit of your Earth Day with us. We can go to the next slide. So as Penny noted, I'm going to be talking a little bit about our Halfway There study and what ACEEE is doing to implement some of the things and what some of the priorities are. But this graph shows projected U.S. energy use from the Energy Information Administration, but the different things that we looked at to reduce this use between now and 2050, whether it's appliances, buildings, industry, transportation. We found we can reduce energy use through all of these strategies by about half, about 49%. We get even greater reductions in carbon dioxide, but when you add in other greenhouse gases, again, it's about halfway. We can reduce our emissions about half, and we'll need low carbon sources and other alternatives to get the remaining emissions reduction. I would note that electrification features significantly in this, and it's about a third of the greenhouse gas reductions. But next slide, please. This shows from that study the division of savings among the many different measures we analyzed. As you can see, car and truck efficiency are real big, as is industry, as is many other different things. It's not just one or two things we need to do, but many, many. Now, I've starred a few of them as indicating these are areas that ACEEE is expanding work in. We've always done, for example, a lot on car and light truck efficiency, but we're going to be doing more on the heavier trucks. Likewise, more on improving freight movement. For buildings, we're going to be doing more to move towards zero energy new construction, but also how do we retrofit existing buildings. And then in industry, we want to be doing more both on current efficiency measures, but how do we grow that pie with new emerging technologies. So next slide, please. So I just wanted to give a few examples of this. In the upper left, we have the first zero energy Walgreens in Iowa, but showing how with dramatic energy efficiency, then a moderate amount of solar energy can make the building net zero. Ultimately, we need to move all our new buildings, or nearly all, there'll be some exceptions, but most buildings to zero net energy, zero net carbon. Existing buildings are going to be more than half the problem, and we need to dramatically reduce their energy use. The slide in the middle left is from an Energy Sprong project. This is a system developed in the Netherlands, but it's now being used in New York State and other places to basically build an exoskeleton and around an existing low-rise building, make it dramatically more efficient. And This is being done. It's in the, you do detailed laser measurements, you produce the panels in a factory, and you hoist them in place. And so you can take an inefficient existing building and make it quite efficient. So we need to do this with many, many buildings, whether it's commercial or residential, and particular focus with homes and apartments lived in by low and moderate income families, because their housing tends to be less efficient than average. In industry, we need to do a lot more as well. In the upper right, I have a little illustration about moving from ordinary Portland cement to green cements, but different chemistries, different drying techniques, so that we reduce carbon dioxide emissions by about 50%. There's a lot of CO2 given off in the normal cement process, but also improving thermal conductivity. Or, and just to play this out a little bit further, do we always need as much cement? The buildings on the right middle are actually wood frame buildings, but increasingly with structural wood members, you can build even mid-rises without heavy use of steel and cement. There'll still be some, but dramatically reduce that, because wood is a so much lower embodied carbon than steel or cement. And then in transportation, we need to do a lot more. I mentioned trucks as an example. On the lower right, that's a picture of the Tesla Semi. It's an electric 18-wheeler, but Freightliner and Volvo also are developing products that are going to be hitting, they're in testing now, but they'll be hitting the roads end of this year and early next year for commercial purchases. But in addition, we need to much better optimize our freight systems, whether it's how we move packages across the trucking, rail, and air modes, but as we are using any one of these modes, how we optimally load things, make maximum use of the available capacity, avoid empty backhauls. Again, dramatic savings possible. So next slide. So those are some of the things that we're working on, but I wanted to relate this in my last slide to the current situation where we're all sheltering in place and dealing with COVID. But COVID, I think, has shown a number of lessons that we can learn as we start thinking about how we can apply these lessons to also addressing the climate change crisis. So COVID has shown us that rapid response is possible. If we really want to do something, we can do so rapidly. COVID has shown us that we have to pay attention to the warning signs, that we should plan ahead. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, we didn't do nearly as much as we could. Hopefully, we will do a lot more to prepare for future pandemics. But likewise, we know there's a climate crisis happening. How do we pay attention to those warning signs and plan ahead? With COVID, at least in the US, a lot of it has been state and local action, and that's been critical, but we really need a lot of national and international coordination. We've had a lot of that with COVID. Perhaps we could have had more. Can we learn from that as we address climate change and get all of these different levels rowing together? One small impact of COVID is that traffic, power use, pollution are all down. Now, we've done that the wrong way, effectively putting our economy into a coma. But as we restart things, can we figure out ways that maybe we can keep a little bit of these benefits? Maybe we work at home a little bit more or drive a little less, etc. On the upper right, you can see this is the India Gate in New Delhi. The upper photo is in a normal November day. The lower photo was about a week ago, just to illustrate how there have been some benefits, and let's try to retain some of those benefits as the economy rebounds. And then there's been a lot of talk about economic stimulus to get out of the recession that we're clearly now in. What can we do to favor clean investments that will help the economy and also help address the climate crisis? And I'd also note that even with COVID, researchers have found that in cities with higher levels of fine particle pollution, there is a greater propensity for respiratory problems and COVID deaths. So if we can reduce the pollution, we can even help better weather future pandemics. So with that, I turn it back to Wendy and look forward to discussion a little later.
Thank you, Steve. Next, we'll hear from Diana Hernandez. She is an assistant professor of socio-medical sciences at Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health. A sociologist by training, she examines how policy and interventions, such as energy efficiency programs, impact the health and well-being of low-income communities and communities of color. A New York City resident, Diana will discuss the particular challenges that climate change and COVID pose for these communities. Diana?
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. Thanks to ACEEE for organizing this. I do sit on the Research Advisory Board and I'm really privileged to do that, and also collaborate with Lauren Ross around energy burden issues. So many intersects, and again, happy to be here. I am going to make three comments on the intersection between COVID-19, where things are, and really kind of planning ahead. And those 3 points, kind of in summary, are about the deep overlap between the communities that are most impacted by COVID, and then the ones that we know to be also struggling in terms of energy burden and energy insecurity, as well as the lack of efficiency in their housing environments. I also want to make the point about the opportunity to move kind of beyond, just economic savings and even the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, to think also about putting people first and what that might look like in terms of more ambitious goals with equity really in mind. And then also moving and kind of shifting the lens away from resilience and more towards security. So to the first point, obviously the kind of impact of COVID has been significant. We've seen the number of infected, not just kind of increase over the last 4 to 5 weeks, but also the number of deaths. As we've looked kind of more specifically at the demographics of who's infected and who's passing, what we have noticed is a deep disparity based on race and ethnicity and socioeconomic status, labor market, kind of workforce elements. And ultimately, it's a profile of COVID attacking the most vulnerable. And at first, we thought the vulnerability kind of began and somewhat ended, in terms of age. But what we're now understanding is that COVID is really also affecting those with comorbidities. So, with hypertension, obesity, diabetes, as examples, other kind of suppressed immune conditions. But if we look a little further, these are also, so COVID is also impacting communities with some of the highest air pollution rates, and where these health disparities have been existing, where unemployment and economic displacement have been a matter of fact for years, if not decades and generations. As well as where housing conditions are known to be problematic, and where, for example, an inefficient home is a luxury in some ways. And so what COVID-19 is doing from a disparities perspective is exposing these vulnerabilities and also exacerbating them. And this is particularly problematic for, again, communities of color and low-income communities that happen to be living in, housing that has housing conditions issues, where they rely on public transportation, but public transportation happens to be a risk, and in terms of interacting with others. Where their work realities mean that many people don't have the luxury to stay home and are very much, out and about on the front lines, working in grocery, at the grocery store, working as delivery people, as civil servants, in transportation, as police officers, etc. And this is not, and also on the front lines of the healthcare system as well. And so that kind of, confluence of factors makes social distancing very difficult for this population, and it also makes home that much more important. But a thermally comfortable home and a dignified home is also made obvious from this, and we are expecting people to stay home, but we're not necessarily ensuring that the conditions are adequate enough. So that is really, in some ways, a summary of the profile of vulnerability and where the kind of intersections between what existed before COVID is kind of more pronounced in this context. So I'll move to my second point, which is really about the kind of massive change that is presented by COVID, and really kind of thinking about it as an opportunity to reimagine housing, economic development, work, including work-related travel and commuting, and how this is really an opportunity to look kind of beyond the traditional metrics of what we imagine to be, climate-friendly policies. A lot of times, the emphasis has been on economic savings or climate impacts. And I'd like to argue that what COVID makes obvious is that people matter. And people matter not just because many of us are longing for, connecting with others in real life, but people matter because, there are major losses that are happening, and people are in fact the ones feeling it. And they're feeling it in terms of the loss of jobs, for instance, the loss of loved ones, the loss of life, etc. And so as we are kind of reimagining the way forward, how do we put people, how do we center people more in our discussions about rebounding? It can't be that we continue to privilege these other metrics, and that people are left behind. And what I'd like to argue is that in some ways, it's easier to meet the kind of economic benchmarks, and even to some extent, reduce emissions by a certain amount. But it's much harder to get, the people-centeredness piece. And I think that that's what's really critical. And if we've learned nothing from the COVID context, it's that if we deny ourselves the opportunity to center people, we also deny ourselves the opportunity to think more creatively and more opportunistically about how to ensure that people have better lives. And that, is related to my last point, which is that, again and again, when disaster strikes, we often use a lens of resilience. And the resilience lens is in some ways, about, people rebounding and communities rebounding. And in this case, globally, we'll need to rebound. But the truth of the matter is that what people might be rebounding to is right. So if their circumstances before a disaster context were less than optimal, if they are rebounding to that kind of status, it's not enough. And so as we think about what's next, we should also be thinking less about resilience and more about security. How do we ensure that households are energy secure, where they have the ability to adequately meet their household energy needs, where affordability is no longer an issue because rates are structured in a way that correspond with people's needs, that the government thinks about a comprehensive set of goods that include telecommunication services, internet, and electricity, natural gas, whatever the kind of utility services are needed in households, that that people are given the opportunity to live as well as they can, to have a dignified existence, to have their basic needs met, so that when they're launching their lives moving forward, they're doing so in a more secure fashion, so that when the next disaster hits, if it's a hurricane or if it's some other kind of global pandemic, that people are in a much more stable position to begin with, and that when they are rebounding, that they're rebounding to a better place. And so with that, I will cede my time, but also, have you all think a little bit about this issue of equity in all policies as we're moving forward with plans around addressing climate change and the impacts of COVID, that we also do so in an equitable fashion. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. We'll now turn to our final speaker, Janet Joseph. She is the Senior Vice President for Strategy and Market Development at the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. She leads NYSERDA's work in building decarbonization, advancing programs and policies to deliver a carbon-neutral building stock. Today, she will provide a state policymaker perspective for addressing climate change as we also deal with COVID-19. Janet?
Thank you, Wendy, and thank you, Steve, for providing us with an opportunity to participate on this panel, along with Penny and Diana and the 700 participants on this webinar on today, Earth Day. So as you may know, New York has established a very aggressive set of greenhouse gas reduction goals, among the most aggressive of any major economy. We have a goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions 40% by 2030, 85% reduction by 2050, and a goal of 100% zero carbon electricity in 2 decades. And all of this is to be done with a keen eye toward addressing the needs of disadvantaged communities. Now, focusing a bit on the energy efficiency topic here, for the first time in New York's history, our energy efficiency goals are codified into law. So the state's energy efficiency goal is to reduce end-use energy consumption by 185 trillion BTUs by 2025. So that's roughly equivalent to fueling and powering close to 2 million homes. But importantly, this level of energy efficiency will deliver nearly 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emission reductions that New York needs to meet our 2030 greenhouse gas goals. And this is really just the beginning. So I'd like to make a few quick points about New York's energy efficiency strategy, and then I'll offer some observations on energy efficiency in the time of COVID and economic recovery. So the strategy that New York has embraced in energy efficiency, it has 3 elements, and these were outlined in our New Efficiency New York proposal 2 years ago today on Earth Day. So the first piece is that we are ramping up utility energy efficiency investments to deliver at scale, including providing programs that can benefit low and moderate income consumers. We are driving innovation in the energy efficiency industry and clean energy industry in general. And the third piece is that we are making structural changes through things like codes and standards to really embed energy efficiency in the way that business is done in New York State. And all of this is with an eye toward leveraging market activity and working as cost effectively as possible. So in terms of progress to date, just a few weeks before the COVID crisis erupted, our New York Public Service Commission established energy efficiency funding for utilities in New York State in excess of $3 billion through 2025. So this more than doubled, and in some cases, tripled the planned utility investment in energy efficiency. And as part of this energy efficiency effort, we're launching a major building electrification initiative. This is our New York Clean Heat Initiative, and this will provide incentives and build market capacity to transform how we heat and cool our buildings in New York State. We are using the Clean Energy Fund, which is administered by NYSERDA, to drive innovation in the energy efficiency industry, investing an additional $2 billion from 2016 through 2025 in energy efficiency. And here we are really trying to push toward carbon neutral buildings through a range of initiatives, which I would be glad to talk about if we have more time. But we're really talking about buildings that have extremely low energy demand, they maximize renewables, and they can serve as flexible grid assets. So our aspirations around this energy efficiency investment in New York State are quite significant, and energy efficiency is indeed a cornerstone of our energy policy in New York. Now, in terms of advancing structural changes through things like codes and standards, we recently launched the New York 2020 Stretch Building Code, and the largest municipality in the state has already adopted this stretch code. So thank you, New York City. They have adopted the stretch code. And we have a dozen other interested municipalities who are seriously considering the stretch code. And I'm pleased to announce that Beacon, the town of Beacon, just 2 days ago adopted a stretch building code. So in the midst of dealing with everything that they have to as a community, as a locality, they see the value in adopting an advanced building code in terms of the benefits it will provide to its constituents. We recently completed a study on the benefits of tighter appliance efficiency standards, and the benefits there are staggering. We're talking about more than $10 billion of consumer energy savings over the life of equipment with improved appliance standards in New York State alone. But our ambitious legislative plans for this year were absolutely, affected by the COVID-19 crisis and its economic wrath. Now, it's hard to do this topic justice in a few minutes, but I'd like to provide a couple of contextual points on New York State's clean energy economy and the COVID implications before we kind of launch into a discussion. So we had over 150,000 people working in the clean energy sector in New York State, and 75% of those jobs are in energy efficiency. The COVID crisis has taken a deep toll on the clean energy sector in New York State, with over 5,000 jobs lost in March alone, and we expect to see, unfortunately, more to come. Now, the health crisis is affecting many sectors of our economy in New York, across the country, and the situation in and of itself is certainly one of the most challenging things we've had to deal with. But we do expect that consumer-facing service industries like energy efficiency will be potentially among the most hard-hit in the economy. So we are doing everything within our power in New York State, at NYSERDA, at the Department of Public Service, at the New York Power Authority, to help our struggling clean energy industry. We are providing enhanced flexibility in programs. We're accelerating payment schedules. We're looking at ways to increase the attractiveness of offers in the future once it's safe to go back into homes, to help get customers to a point where they can say yes to an energy efficiency job, which we know, or an energy efficiency project, which we know will be difficult in a tight economy. We're looking at things like zero interest loans, increasing co-op marketing, all trying to help our clean energy business partners and trying to increase the appeal and the value to consumers. We have to work toward making this energy efficiency industry stronger on the other side of this COVID crisis. So we need the energy efficiency industry to achieve our climate goals. We cannot afford a dissolution of this market infrastructure, and quite frankly, we do not have time to rebuild it. So the stakes are really high. The energy efficiency and clean energy industry has to be part of our economic recovery going forward. So how can the energy efficiency industry come out on the other side of this health crisis in a stronger position? And I think that's what we really need to focus on. So a few ideas, a few things that we're working on. More virtual, more remote services could potentially reduce customer acquisition costs and deliver more value to consumers. I want to pick up something that Diana touched on in her comments, putting people in the center of our building initiatives, integrating more healthy home and wellness services into energy efficiency core offers could increase the customer appeal associated with energy efficiency. You know, buildings are where we live, they're where we raise our families, they're where we build our communities, and sometimes that is woefully silent in discussions that we have about energy efficiency interventions and investments across the country. So, you know, our green building wave has started to push issues around healthy homes and wellness, and I think COVID just shines a bright light on the criticality of that, and we'll really need to accelerate it. Another, I think, opportunity to kind of come out stronger in the other side is to potentially unlock the promise of advanced data and analytics to target customers where the value proposition is there. The rest of the economy has done it. We've been talking about this in energy efficiency for a number of years. I would say a year ago it was a nice to have. I think as we look to the future world, the new normal post-COVID, that's a need to have. We have to do as much smart virtual work as possible. So I'm convinced we will see more innovation in the energy efficiency industry. You know, we will see some companies and business models emerge stronger, and sadly, we will see some companies go under. As policymakers and program administrators, I think we really need to pivot our thinking. I was reminded yesterday in a conversation with a colleague in the Northwest that they launched a major heat pump program in the Great Recession of 2008 that really kept the HVAC industry humming in their region and actually accelerated market transformation. Steve talked about Energy Sprong in the Netherlands earlier on in his remarks. Well, they launched Energy Sprong in the middle of the Great Recession, focusing on deep home retrofits. And it kept the construction industry moving and engaged when other parts of their economy were languishing. So the right energy efficiency strategies can keep the economy moving. You know, on the job front in New York, we have 120,000 people employed in the energy efficiency industry in 2018. And it is the most vibrant part of our clean energy sector. 75% of the jobs are in energy efficiency. We have major climate legislation at the city level as well. New York City passed what's called Local Law 97, and the Urban Green Institute and MIT estimate that compliance with New York City's climate law could require an additional labor force of another 100,000 workers to handle what will be necessary, the volume of retrofits each year. Now, here's an interesting point. Just a few months ago, we surveyed the clean energy industry in New York, and most of the companies, I believe it was 3/4 of the companies, said that they were facing intense and looming labor shortages. Well, the labor situation has sadly flipped as a result of the current crisis that we're in, and that situation will be quite different for the next year or two. So, you know, the expression out of crisis comes opportunity. We need to figure out how we activate this labor force and get them into the energy efficiency business. We need to do what we can to ensure that the energy efficiency industry comes out of this stronger with better business models, with better value proposition to consumers, with the customer, with the consumer in the center of the initiative, and with a new and expanded labor force. So, you know, there is a future where we can see a stronger energy efficiency industry, and there is a future where we build clean energy into our economic recovery plans. It will take leadership at the state level, and we are absolutely committed to this in New York State. And it will take leadership at the federal level, as Steve mentioned. It will take stimulus funding. So, you know, in closing, if this COVID crisis has shown us anything, it is that, you know, government can actually do some amazing things. The country can work together. We can mobilize trillions of dollars of funding to address an existential threat. And we will need to be reminded of that as we address our longer term climate challenges. So I'll close with one quick anecdote. When the COVID crisis broke out, I contacted my daughter, who is a graduate student at Berkeley studying architecture. And I asked her how she was doing. And the first thing that she said to me was, "I'm hopeful." And I paused and I said, "Wow, expand, help me to be hopeful," because I was not feeling very hopeful at the moment as everything was breaking out in New York with COVID. So in the words of a millennial, she said that for the first time in her life, she was hopeful that we will solve the climate crisis, that she had never seen government act so swiftly with such commitment and such an impact to protect the public. So if we can do this for COVID, we can do this to solve climate change. So on this 50th anniversary of Earth Day, I too am hopeful that we will learn from this health crisis and we will address the call of the climate crisis. And we will do it by building clean energy into our economic recovery and by putting people in the center of what we build. So I thank you for your time and attention and look forward to the discussion here.
Thank you, Janet. We'll now take a few questions from the audience, and I've been kind of putting those into categories. And as Janet and some of the other speakers mentioned, we were talking a lot about recovery and what we can do in addressing energy efficiency, tackling climate in the COVID, as we kind of also deal with COVID. And one thing I do want to ask each speaker to talk just very briefly about is several questions involve the stimulus package. And so I want to ask each person just to kind of weigh in as far as what do you think most important provision, energy efficiency related provision, perhaps we should try to target for the next federal stimulus package, or even at the state level as well. So Steve, why don't you go first?
Sure. I will mention two things. One, at the moment, we have a lot of empty schools. We have a lot of empty businesses. I wonder if we can put crews to work, and is there a lot more if we can get things going quickly to really help retrofit these while they are empty and put the crews to work. Yes, they'll have to social distance, but they wouldn't have to worry about workers, etc. The other thing is I'd very much say we need to be doing a lot more to help people weatherize their houses and apartments, particularly with an emphasis on low moderate. So I'd like to see a major infusion of the low income weatherization program, but also we're working on ideas for multifamily housing as well, which is somewhat works with weatherization, but can be very challenging and probably needs its own approaches.
Anyone else want to join in there?
Hi, this is Janet. I can just build on Steve's comment. I do think in the recovery packages and the stimulus packages, we do very much need to provide additional assistance to those who will be the hardest hit by this economic crisis, and those are low and moderate income consumers. So if ever there was a time to increase funding for weatherization and energy efficiency programs targeted at low and moderate income consumers, it's definitely now. So I just want to underscore how important and how critical that is. And then related to that, at least in New York, a lot of the businesses that are serving those low and moderate income programs, they're small businesses. So if we provide investment into low and moderate income energy efficiency programs, we are both helping small businesses as well as consumers who need it the most.
Hi, Wendy. This is Penny, and just to build on those comments, which were great, is that I do believe that this investment in ensuring that energy efficiency continues. Our states can lead by example in our communities by opening up the schools and buildings so that we can do this energy efficiency work. We also need to really invest in transforming our business delivery processes. You heard Janet talk about that being people-centered. We have launched at Eversource virtual energy efficiency audits for both residential and commercial. These have been extremely successful and engages our business partners and our consumers in on the process. It significantly reduces the time, and we are finding a tremendous uptake in people scheduling for weatherization, a 75% uptake by our early remarks. So we are really excited about that. But this investment in this energy efficiency community is something that is vitally important. Redirecting or directing funds to ensure that we are providing education. I'll share a quote from one of our partners. We've been investing in training our contractors all across the 3 states, offering Green Training USA. And one of our business partners noted that without this training, which would have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in the marketplace, they wouldn't have been able to provide this for their employees. So, so they were thrilled that we were able to do it. So I think we need to do more of that. Again, lead by example.
One thing I wanted to ask Penny and others as well, if you want to jump in. This is something Steve mentioned in his blog post today, which is we were looking at the lessons of COVID and how we address and also tackling climate change. And one of the things we were discussing is what habits we've radically reduced energy use, but not in the way that any of us want to, you know. And but we've learned some things from the changes that we've had to make because of COVID. And I wanted to ask you, and Penny, I think when we were speaking last week, you mentioned there are certain jobs that you've now realized within Eversource that when the economy reopens, that they won't necessarily need to be in the office, that they could still be working remotely. So I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about ways that you see things that we've learned because of the changes we made from COVID. How could we continue to reduce energy use, whether it's fewer people working in buildings or that type of thing? So if you could start and then others jump in.
I'd be happy to. And, you know, Diana had shared that it would be a shame if we let this opportunity and the savings that we're already seeing dissipate. We are seeing energy savings by the new habits, and some of them make tremendous sense. We moved our 450 call center agents out within 10 days at Eversource. We also have moved out all of our office and back office personnel. In fact, most 90% of our office personnel are working from home. But the contact center is particularly challenging because you do need to be able to ensure that calls are routed and answered, but the efficiencies are tremendous. So we had a little bit of a storm go through here last week. It took out 200,000 customers. We were able to get them on within 30 hours. Our call center agents' response, we had a 6-second average speed of answer. And the interesting thing is that as opposed to a normal storm event, not that there are any of them normal, but when we have storm events, we are often having to think about how do we bring in our call center reps coming through a blizzard, how do we house them, how do we feed them? But with them working from home, all of those logistics are taken off the plate. It really was a beautiful solution, and the feedback from our agents is they really love it, and our customers are really appreciating it too. So our customers, we put out messaging to this to remind them that if they do hear a stray dog barking, that we are operating from home, and the feedback has been very positive.
Anyone else have a kind of a quick example of how they think maybe we could continue to reduce energy use once when the economic recovery kicks in?
I mean, from a educational standpoint, you know, most of us have gone to remote classes, and this is true from, you know, kind of K through graduate school. And I do think that there are potential benefits to doing so, certainly for students and for school staff, teachers, administrators, etc. You know, it changes the dynamic. Learning remotely is different than learning in person, and yet I think it's you know, we have learned a lot, and there has been kind of a rapid transition to online learning. And so, you know, I think that that's a modality that we should explore more and see what we can do about like establishing community in different ways. And I wanted to mention, in terms of the stimulus, I didn't answer the earlier question, but I did want to kind of mention that idea that bill assistance, especially for utilities, should be expanded, and that maybe this is also an opportunity to reimagine moratoriums, like whether or not shutoffs should be the mechanism of like a cost recovery strategy for utilities. But using that as an opportunity for engagement and expanding the weatherization assistance program, and also linkages to households that have a demonstrated need. This has been a continuous issue for the Light Heat program in general, and for WAP especially, to just kind of link to households and engage those that might benefit from the services. So if it's a needs-based approach, I think that it can also be a way to target and to reach households that are in need.
Okay. Thank you, Diana. And we only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to just ask perhaps Steve this question just very quickly, and that is, have we seen any kind of attacks on EE programs? Are you concerned that the momentum we have been making could be stalled at this point, or how do you look at this going forward? I mean, is there a kind of, how are we going to continue to push forward?
A couple of questions in there. Have things slowed? Yes, as Penny and Janet will, I'm sure, attest. If you can't go into homes, if you have difficulty going into many businesses, at the very moment there is less activity. When we can restart up, we will. I've noticed a number of utilities that have been offering enhanced incentives for a period of time for where it is possible to get some people to do things. But those will need to extend until people are ready to open up. So that's some of it. Yeah, there have been a couple of policy proposals from people who don't like the programs. Well, we're going to be in a recession. We need to save the money. I know there's been one in New York State, but I don't think it's really, Jenna can comment, is getting any legs as opposed to a shot across the bow. There's been one in Indiana, but their programs are pretty modest now. So hopefully that won't be a problem, but instead people will recognize that in an economic crisis, helping to reduce energy bills is an important contributor, not to mention a down payment, if you will, in addressing the climate crisis.
I'm afraid we're going to have to stop there. We're just about out of time. I do want to thank you for participating in today's webinar. We'll send you a link to its recording, which will also be available on ACEEE's YouTube page. If you want to join our call to action and help us scale energy efficiency to fight climate change, we have set up a Halfway There Fund, and you can learn more about it at aceeee.org/donate. I'm Wendy Koch, and on behalf of ACEEE, I hope you stay safe and healthy, and you can, perhaps with a walk outside today, at least it's nice in the DC area, also enjoy Earth Day 2020. Thank you.